Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's Mortgage Minute. My name is Art Alvarez. I'm with Mortgage Works, where we have the answers and they're on the house. We are coming to you from Palm Springs and the greater Coachella Valley area. And boy, oh boy, I got to tell you, our weather is about perfect. Sorry to brag, but only very mild breezes, if at all. Crystal clear, blue skies, not a cloud in the sky, and incredibly comfortable for us here in the desert. Low to mid 80s. It's just a terrific weather we've had the last couple of days. Got pretty darn windy early in the week, but also, I forgot to mention after last week, heading into the Memorial Day weekend, I forgot to mention a event that I'm a big fan of, and that was the Indy 500 was last weekend, last Sunday, and that's a terrific event. I've been fortunate enough to have attended that event in the past. And this year's race was phenomenal. Of course, had the closest finish ever in the 110-year history of the event. Felix Rosenquist beat out David Malukas. It was a very, very exciting finish, so that was good to see. Motor racing is near and dear to my heart. In fact, coming up, I don't think it's this weekend. I think next weekend is the Monaco Grand Prix. I did have the fortune to go to that event many years ago, so I felt pretty lucky about that. Monaco, Indy 500, Daytona 500, which I've been to. Those are sort of the big three auto racing events. If you ever go to any, try to hit those three big ones. And then the fourth one that I'm going to try to hit is the 24-hour of Le Mans. If I get that one, then I'll have all four, and that would be just something to be proud of. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk about the mortgage and bond market. First thing we do is show you our rates on our rate grid on our website. A little bit of improvement this week from last week. Thankfully, that 10-year bond yield has settled down a little bit. We'll touch on that in a second, but we're back to the 6.25 range. We were getting up there close to 6.5, but again, we've had a little bit of improvement. Again, there's some more positive signs about the Iran war, but again, still no deal, but some positivity there apparently, and bond yields have settled down a little bit, and actually oil prices have cooled off a bit as well. So that's part of why these rates that you're seeing here are all, for the most part, a little bit improved from last week. And then the bond market, the 10-year bond, here's our chart. This is over the last 5 days, and this is the kind of chart you see. And, of course, Jeff is circling that Wednesday dip. And, of course, started off this morning okay, but we did get that, kick up close to back, actually over 450, and then, boom, comes right back down to 445. To end the day. So that's a pretty good story this week. And again, that's why you saw that improvement a little bit on our rate grid and why there's been a little bit of relief on this concern that maybe we were heading to 6% on a conforming loan. I think that danger has cooled quite a bit. So let's go ahead and look at what's gone on in terms of data points, and these days, geopolitical events as it relates to the markets. Not a lot of data this week, a lot of what I call Fed speak. When you look at the U.S. economic calendar for this week, a lot of the days are filled up. Of course, short week because Monday was a holiday. A lot of the days were filled up with various speeches by different members of the Fed. So that's why I call it lots of Fed speak. One good sliver of hope, actually, consumer confidence, despite all the hand-wringing and complaining about the economy and how challenging it is with rising gas costs, food costs, etc. Consumer confidence actually improved. 93.1 versus 92 was forecast. So that was interesting and kind of surprising. Case-Shiller Index, 20-city home price index. That, again, folks, showed not a real robust gain, but still a gain, 0.7% gain in March over the previous year. So the point is, yes, home prices have moderated. That is an opportunity for prospective buyers. We'll keep telling you that they have moderated. You have more leverage, in your basket, and but prices are still, they're still going more northward than southward. So, a 0.7 gain in March is a pretty positive sign, all things considered. All the negative, news about the housing market. Now, the big news, big data point for this week is the PCE, the personal consumption expenditure index. That is a mouthful. That's the Fed's favorite inflation gauge. And it was interesting. It's forecast to be below. It's forecast to be 0.5 for April. The forecast was 0.7. Well, it actually came out at 0.4. And then interesting, the core PCE forecast, which was forecast to be flat at 0.3%, actually came in at 0.2%. So this favorite, inflation gauge for the Fed actually seemed to show some cooling. Now, I actually saw a headline this morning on the business news when these numbers were released where somebody referenced that the PCE came in hot. I don't know what numbers he was looking at, but looking at the results on, again, that U.S. economic calendar, I thought this number was actually generally good news, which, again, is part of why I think that 10-year bond yield has creeped to a little bit more improvement, having you just seen closing this afternoon at 445. So that's, guarded, of course, but it's some decent news that we should be considering that things maybe are kind of settling down. And then if we can get some clarity and some breakthrough with this Iran war, I think we could see some, pretty interesting times coming up and pretty interesting to the positive in terms of maybe bond yields and oil prices, and therefore mortgage rates start to settle down. And who knows, maybe we can break through that 6% level that we were at all the way back now, it seems like, in February of this year. So let's see what happens. I think we have a pretty good shot at that. So we are going to follow up this week again. We're going to talk about HELOANs and why they are different than HELOCs. And that's, we think, is a pretty good subject because there's actually a lot of information to know about this particular subject and as to the comparison of these two, what I would call core equity products. There's a lot of little details that I think I can help you with in terms of understanding which is going to be the best approach for your situation. So with that, we're going to go ahead and bring Jeff back on and we'll get into the discussion.
Hey, Art.
Hey there. Hi, Jeff.
Well, yeah, I think first of all, I just want to comment on the economic news. That's always good. And, the old idea of the numbers are coming in hot. It reminds me of a guy who played with pickleball, and no matter where I hit it, he yelled out. It just didn't make any sense.
Yeah, I understand. It was an odd headline for me to see. Once I actually had read the report, I don't know how that particular writer came up with that angle. So
maybe that's just the way they're supposed to be. No matter what the conditions are, it's got to be something negative, right?
Beware the headlines.
Yeah. So, here's the first question I want to talk about today is HELOC versus home equity loan. Which one makes more sense?
Well, yeah, and it's a terrific question. And of course, that's why we're going to dive pretty deep into this because, these acronyms, particularly the HELOC one, HELOAN is, I think, less recognized or not used as much. But, when you hear these, from a standard, homeowner or consumer, you're really starting off a little confused just because of the terminology involved, and especially when you get into acronyms. I think HELOCs have become fairly well known, but despite that, I think there's a lot about them still folks don't really have a grasp on it. So then it becomes even more confusing when they start hearing HELOAN. So then, of course, that even puts in another layer of, well, now we've got a similar sounding but different product, but we're not sure why. So that's why we want to help folks discern the differences so that you're really making the right choice for your situation.
That sounds good. It is, I think, for, it's one of those things that and this is probably true across almost every industry, is someone like yourself who's been doing it for as long as you have, you work in this terminology every day. And for the average homeowner, especially if you're a new homeowner, how many years in between, making these kind of decisions do you typically see? It's many years, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. Absolutely. Sure. Many, many years. Yes.
Yeah. So it's, and we're talking about, obviously home equity loans. So somebody has owned a home, but, like my wife and I, we've lived in the same home for over 20 years. And we may not even know these terms exist, right?
Exactly right. And for example, real quick, just since we have the two acronyms up here on this particular page, let me help everyone just to understand the kind of the logic about these acronyms. HE, that's home equity, right? HE is home equity. So HELOC, home equity line of credit. HE loan, home equity loan. It's not a line of credit because it's not reusable. It's a loan. So that's the simple way to distinguish at the most general level HELOC versus a HELOAN. And by the way, in our parentheses, we say often called a HELOAN or second mortgage. One additional point of clarification for everyone, and I get this from time to time, and I find it kind of humorous. Understand that whether we're talking a HELOC or a HELOAN, they are a second mortgage. Because sometimes I'll get an inquiry from a homeowner and they want to ask me about a HELOC. And I'll make reference to the fact that I'll refer to it as a second mortgage. And then they'll stop me and say, oh, no, I don't want a second mortgage. I want a HELOC. So I have to explain to the person inquiring that a HELOC is a second mortgage. So either product and any equity loan is going to be a second, or more technically defined, junior mortgage lien on your property.
Well, there's that perfect example of what we're talking about. It's like, we don't even know. We didn't want a second mortgage. We wanted a HELOC. Yeah. Right. And so it's interesting to know that, because these are big decisions, right?
Very much so. Yes. As we're going to show.
So here's the thing. And if you missed last week, you can go back and catch that show for those of you watching. But I really just kind of want to go through and say, hey, real quickly go through a HELOC and best for flexibility and ongoing access to cash. Talk us about that, because I think each one has a different characteristic, doesn't it?
Exactly right. So yeah, I think it'd be great. Let's go ahead and get into that a little bit. Okay, so the thing to know about a HELOC is it shows here best for flexibility and ongoing need for cash. Now we have HELOCs that offer a 3-year draw period. We can also arrange a HELOC where you will have a 10-year draw period. So that's your period ongoing to access your cash.
Now, Art, can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question okay, so just again, for those people who may not be savvy of this, when you say draw, what does that mean?
Well, what it means is you're requesting to take some money out of the line of credit and spend it on whatever you want. In fact, the way to think about it, the analogy I urge homeowners to think of, which can be dangerous, by the way, is think of a HELOC as a credit card secured by your house, because a HELOC essentially works the same way as a credit card. So when I say you have draw access, so that's like you have a credit card with a credit limit that's not used. Let's say you have a zero balance. So you have all this access to money on demand by presenting your card. So when you're drawing against your HELOC, it's like you're presenting your card, to the bank, and you're drawing money out of your line of credit that's on your house to get the cash you need for whatever it is you want to spend it on. So that's what I mean by the draw. So then that's the point, is the HELOC, therefore, you're going to have a credit line that's like your loan amount. That's your maximum amount you can access for that loan. That's the maximum amount you're approved for to draw against. And then you just draw that money as you need to during the draw period. So yeah, so when you think about it, with that kind of structure, what is it going to be best suited for? Well, I can give you some ideas. Any kind of significant renovation on your home. That's a very common use for a HELOC, especially if the renovation is going to be somewhat ongoing over a relatively long period of time. That way you're just drawing on it as you're going through your project. Sometimes just for reserves. Some folks just want a line of credit in place essentially as cash reserves. They don't necessarily have to draw against it to put the cash in the bank. Why would you do that? You're incurring interest, but at least you know it's there. It's kind of your rainy day. But getting a HELOC these days, there's sort of an obstacle to getting to that point of enjoying it that way, which I can describe later on or at another time. Other things, tuition, 4 years of college. Pay tuition every year over 4 years. Consolidating debt, of course. Got to be careful with that, so you're not re-incurring that debt you're consolidating with the HELOC. Sometimes seasonal expenses, sometimes periods of the year that homeowner has expenses that are greater than other times of the year. So you can kind of ride that wave with this kind of financing facility. And if you're a self-employed person, you're running a business. I have a good customer who her first mortgage is in place. She's got a HELOC that we arranged for her. She uses the HELOC to draw on as she's hiring new employees for her business. So that's a great example of how a HELOC can be a very good instrument for that kind of situation.
Art, can I ask a question about that particular situation?
Sure.
If the draw is, let's say, 10 years, does that mean I can draw on that fund, that balance, up to 10 years? And the other one you said was 3 years, as
Correct.
an example.
Correct.
So in this situation, if I'm going to use it for my business, as you just described, then would I want to seek out one that gives me that longer draw period?
Correct. Yeah, that's part of the sort of your own analysis as a prospective borrower would want to go through, is try to understand your future use and be specific about it. And if you're a business owner, of course, yeah, you're much going to prefer that access to the money over a 10-year period versus 3. 3 years can be pretty quick, especially if you're running a business. You got to think out not just 3 years, but 5 years, and yes, even 10 years. So getting that HELOC with the 10-year draw period usually is going to be more popular to that self-employed borrower, because they want that draw for a longer period of time. So that's an important thing to note. However, one thing I'll tell you, and we'll get into disadvantages maybe here in a minute, but with a HELOC, the only thing you have to watch out for is if there was an economic downturn, things got recessionary, maybe there's really some concern about home prices falling. A HELOC lender has basically the unilateral right to freeze your account. And keep you from drawing additional money, even if it's available balance versus the credit limit in a severe economic downturn. And we saw this after the Great Recession of 2008. HELOCs got unilaterally closed because the lender could identify that the homeowner had lost most, if not all, their equity, and the home was essentially underwater on value.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of advantages, as we kind of touched on, you borrow when needed. So of course, related to that is you're only paying interest on what you have used. So again, if you don't need all of the money that the line of credit offers in a lump sum, you have that ability to access it when you need it, and you're only incurring interest costs on the amount that you did use for the amount of time that you're using it before you pay it back. You'll typically have a lower payment initially. The HELOCs generally have a interest-only payment period from 3 to 10 years, so that your required monthly payment is not including any principal. It's just interest only. So that keeps your required payment down. But of course, understand, if you're going to pay that minimum, you're not paying down your balance at all. So you're not freeing up additional money to reuse if you want to have that in place for that 3-year or 10-year draw period. And then, of course, just the fundamental reuse feature. You can reuse it as you pay it down. Your monthly payment goes down because it's based on the remaining balance. And then, of course, you can pay it all the way down to zero, and suddenly your payments stop because you owe nothing. You have no interest cost. But it's still sitting there, particularly if it's a 10-year draw, so that you can then again turn around and pretty much on demand, because a lot of times these HELOCs come with a credit card, not just a checkbook. In fact, almost always more a credit card than a checkbook. But the point is, you can get the money pretty much on demand, and then you're only paying for it, for the amount of time you're using it, and at the interest rate that's being charged on that portion that you've drawn. So
the considerations, or I guess this would be disadvantages, some things we want to make sure we're aware of before we decide this is the way we want to go. Can you share those with us?
Yeah, the most important thing to understand, it's to use the most popular vernacular, it's an ARM loan. It's an adjustable rate loan. More technically, HELOCs are called variable rate loans. So it's not a fixed loan. Your interest rate is subject to change. Now, unlike a classic traditional adjustable rate loan, where you're going to have an index plus a margin, for HELOCs, it's almost always the U.S. prime rate, which is currently 6.75. And then depending on your credit score, your loan to value, you could have a margin over prime as low as 0. There's a few HELOC lenders even offer a negative margin, if not for the life of the HELOC, maybe for an intro period of 6 or 12 months. But understand, in that case, it's a teaser. It's not the actual rate. But the point is that you could end up with a pretty low rate if you've got a very good credit score, typically above 760 or 780. And if your combined loan to value, your first and your HELOC, don't exceed 60% of your value, you could easily get a HELOC that's going to start in the low to mid sixes.
Wow.
And that's pretty darn good when you consider if your first is at 2.5, then, when you think about what you would do is think about the total amount of the HELOC that you're planning on borrowing, add it to your first mortgage. You can actually calculate what your blended interest rate cost is between those two loans. And what you're going to find is by going with the HELOC, assuming your first is big enough, if your first is really tiny, give up the first and just get a new first. But if your first is a pretty good size and the HELOC's not going to be greater in size, yeah, you're almost better off. Keep that 2.5 first, get that HELOC that could be at 6.5 or 6.75, and your blended cost of all that financing combined is maybe going to be 4.5. If instead of just paying off your first and get a whole new first mortgage, which of course if you want to go that way and we could help you, frankly we get paid more because it's a bigger loan amount, but it's probably not your best financial choice. So that's why these HELOCs and equity lending in general now has gotten so much more popular, is for those folks who've got that low rate mortgage. They thought they needed to sell, they decided they're going to stay put, and they're going to figure out how to make that home their next 10-year or maybe forever home that they didn't think it was going to be initially.
Well, the other thing that seems to jump out at me when you talk about the HELOC being like a credit card, the one thing it's not like credit card is the interest that you're paying. That's a massive difference, isn't it?
A massive difference in rate, obviously. Even if we're talking the best rates in the mid high sixes, even if you're okay on credit score but not great, and so maybe you're going to end up with a HELOC that's going to be in the 7s or even the 8s or even frankly into the 9s. Just assume that you're in. Just think of it this way though, and seriously, is people freak out. Oh my gosh, 9.5! It's so terrible. Well, excuse me, but let's have a kind of a revisit with our objective here. You have $53,000 of credit card debt at 22%, and we're taking and arranging a HELOC for you to pay it off. And the reason we need to do that is because it's way too much debt, way too much expense in interest cost, and it's greatly adversely affected your credit score. You have so much revolving debt. The reason you're at a 668 instead of a 780 is because you're overextended on credit card debt, which is almost as bad as a bunch of late payments. So what you have to be strategic about, don't get too emotional about, is if I can get you a HELOC, it's at 9.5, and we're paying off that amount of credit card debt that's at 22%. That's what am I waiting for? Slam dunk, push the button, go. Let's get it done. Then, and this is the other consideration with a HELOC: discipline to not over borrow. That's
what do you mean by that?
Well, it's a danger with HELOCs, because remember, a HELOC is like a credit card secured by your house. And once folks get one sometimes, and if they have a lot of excess credit that they haven't used, you can start to lose discipline. You can, because you're going to realize, wow, this money's like a credit card. And you may get an impulse to buy something or pay for something, an event or what have you, and suddenly what creeps in is you start using your HELOC for expenditures that are not asset related. You're not improving your property. You're not improving your financial situation by reallocating your debt cost away from high interest credit cards to this other financing vehicle secured by your house, understanding in that journey, you've got to rethink your behavior going forward, so you're not going back and running up the consumer debt again to where you have to come back to that HELOC and do it a second time. So that's what I mean about you have to be careful with HELOCs, because you can suddenly find yourself using it for miscellaneous expenses that are poor decisions in terms of what kind of return you're getting for that expenditure, as opposed to improvements of the house and those kind of things. And then just the fact that, if you don't end up using it for miscellaneous things that you shouldn't, you don't change your behavior to where, if you pay off that credit card debt or any kind of high interest debt, that you don't incur that kind of debt again after you've already used up some of your equity to get rid of it one time. If you get rid of it one time, it better be one time, and don't let it come back a second time. I mean, I know that's kind of blunt talk, but you really have to be careful of that kind of thinking when you're getting a HELOC.
Well, a couple of things. We talk about the interest rate savings, but so what you're saying is, hey, don't be using it to buy Coachella tickets at the last minute. They're $1,000 a piece.
Correct.
Okay.
But people will do that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. And so give us an example of how someone would, but before I do that, you mentioned something earlier. You said, hey, not only would you pay off that credit card debt, which was holding your credit scores down. So that seems like another hidden benefit that all of a sudden, hey, I went from and you can correct me, I went from a 640 to a 730 because all of a sudden my debt is gone. It's different. Is that true?
Well, that's correct. And again, what's a little tricky, I mean, you want to be, clear about this. HELOCs get pretty hard to qualify for when you're in those lower credit score levels. Most of them won't touch you if you're under 640. Some you have to be at least 660 or higher. And then even if you meet one of those two thresholds, your access to funds is going to be more restricted. Your loan to value is going to be cut back. When you have a very good credit score, you can get one of these HELOCs like up to 90% of your value.
Wow.
But if you're at 660, no, you're going to be at maybe 70% at best. And so that could be an issue depending on how much your first is and then what the value of your home is. But the point is, if even at the score you're at, let's say it is 660, you're able to get enough to eliminate the high debt that you have incurred. That and even though because you're at 660, the HELOC rate's not going to be at 675, it's going to be at 975. Understand you're basically, it's a business decision, and you're think of yourself as a business, and you're saying, I need to get rid of this high interest debt. I've got a financing vehicle that will allow me to do that. The interest cost is 2.5 times lower, and I need to then connect the dots and realize when I complete this financial move, I'm going to change my business expenditures going forward, so I don't reincur this bad high rate debt over here back up again. And now I'm back to square one. In the meantime, I've used up $100,000 of my home equity for something that ultimately I didn't fix the long-term problem.
Wow. I think this has been great for as far as understanding now a HELOC. Those that were here last week, this is like 201. Right. This is really good. Before we head to HELOANs, because I really want to know about that, can you give us an example, just a simple example of how this would be best used
for the HELOC? Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are so many examples. It's like, where would I start? Because truly, I mean, there's so many ways that you can use this. In fact, it's funny, I mentioned earlier tuition.
Yes.
I did a transaction like that just last fall. A past customer of mine. I've known him for literally 20 years. I've done a multiple. I mean, he owns, a couple, not just his primary home, a couple of rental properties, et cetera, et cetera. And got to talking to him again, and he wanted to, access some funds out of one of his rental properties. And when I got to talk to him about the use of it, and he did indicate that he was going to be using it over a period of a few years. Well, once we dug into it, what I learned was it was going to be for tuition.
I'll be darned.
He had a son coming out of high school, going to go to college, going to go to a 4-year university, a good one, i.e. an expensive one. And so he decided this was going to be a great way to, facilitate financing that expense and do it over time, pull the money as needed. And, of course, once the college is done, then assuming there's no, postgraduate, all kinds of, fancy stuff after that, then he was actually thinking, well, at that point, he'll probably sell the property on a 1031 exchange and then move the equity to another rental property, and off he goes.
Wow, that's a smart play.
Yeah. I mean, and so with HELOCs, there's so many things. And again, I would urge anybody who's self-employed, having a HELOC on your home as sort of a backup emergency you need some capital for your business is a pretty good idea. It's definitely something to think about. And by the way, some self-employed people will say, well, the problem with that is I even have a harder time qualifying for a HELOC because I'm self-employed. And that is often true. But I will quick mention to our viewers, don't forget for HELOCs, we can arrange them using bank statements for income. So just as we do with first mortgages, as part of that non-QM world, we can arrange a HELOC for a self-employed borrower using your business bank statements. Average up your business-related deposits. We take an expense ratio from that, and then the result is your average monthly qualifying income. And very often, if you have strong gross income in your business, that bank statement HELOC program will work very well. And that would be a great, like I said, kind of a safety net, a backup financing vehicle for your business if you run into some cash flow issues or what have you.
I like that. Well, let's get over to this next one, which is the HELOAN. Tell us about that, because as it says here, best for a one-time lump sum. So it's different than the HELOC as an example.
Correct. Home equity loan. So HELOAN, home equity loan, which of course now that explains why you've never heard us talk about SHE loans. I thought sooner or later when I say HELOAN, somebody's going to say, well, what about SHE loans? Don't we have SHE loans? Equal treatment. We have HELOANs. Sure, we have SHE loans. Well, I don't know how to say equity loan, home equity with a SH. I don't know how to do it. Anyway, I digress. The home equity loan provides, as it says here, it's a lump sum loan. It's your traditional fixed rate loan. Think of your 30-year fixed rate loan. When you get it, it's a lump sum, right? You get all the money. Usually it's to purchase a home. Or if it's cash out, you get all the money after, let's say your home is free and clear, you get all the money after the loan closes. It's a fixed rate loan. So you get your money all at once. There's no reuse. There's no pay it down and then charge it back up and pay it down. None of that. It's a fixed rate all at once, fixed for the entire term. And by the way, with the HELOANs, unlike the HELOCs, you can choose different terms. You can do a 10-year HELOAN. And I've done a few. I've had some homeowners say, yeah, I want to take out an equity loan, but I want only a 10-year term. I know the payment's higher, but they had the liquid assets, so they could handle it. And they just didn't want to carry the debt for that longer period. And guess what the bonus on that is? Usually if the term is lower, what's the trade-off? The rate is going to be lower. You're going to get a better rate on a 10-year term versus a 30-year term. So you've got the cash flow and you want to still use your equity, at least initially. A HELOAN is a great option and usually can be a better option rate-wise over a HELOC. If you've got a good score, you've got really good equity, and you're willing to take a very short term, like 10 or 15 year, you're going to get a better rate. And, that's important to some homeowners.
Well, I'm curious because this has a totally different dynamic. It's not in and out. It's one time, and I need all the cash right now. So give us an example of who this is best suited for or situation.
Yeah, this one, and it's going to sound redundant, but I'm going to kind of give a more subtle difference. Pay high interest debt, but let me suggest this way. Paying high interest debt can be different things. One option that we see a lot of, and I've done a few of them, is we do a HELOAN for someone who has a significant IRS installment plan for income taxes due. This can be a very good option. You don't really want this financing vehicle that you want to draw on over 3 years or 10 years. You've got a specific high debt problem and you want to eliminate it or, take it away or put it in a different form. And so a HELOAN can be a very good way to just, if you've got the equity, take that loan, pay this installment loan off, whatever the balance is in lump sum, and be done with it. Because, with the installment loan, longer you go, you're kind of incurring interest and penalties. And it's kind of gets built into the payment, and you want to kind of cut the bleeding. So a HELOAN, again, a very specific amount that you need. Or sometimes it can be, we've had some situations where we've done a HELOAN, not a HELOC, because somebody decided they wanted to pay off a pretty expensive car.
Oh.
And they had the equity in their home, and they realized they can get a better rate on the HELOAN than they were paying on their car loan. And so they decided to go that direction. So there's those kind of debt payoff situations I think work better. Sometimes it's to purchase a specific investment because again, you can use the proceeds on a HELOC or HELOAN, an equity loan from your home for just about any reason. And so we do have folks who will take a lump sum that they need, and they have a particular specific investment opportunity they want to pursue. Again, they don't want to get into a HELOC and have their rate change and the interest expense change and this and that and the other. They have a specific thing in mind, a specific expenditure of a specific amount of money. So, something like a specific investment opportunity is what they'll do. Fund a, major one-time expense, obviously. Any kind of major one-time expense. Oftentimes, that's more maintenance and damage related. They've got some issue in the home in terms of maintenance that they put off, and now it's become a problem that must be solved. And it's become a major, but really just a one-time expense. A HELOAN is usually going to be a better option. You're buying out a business from your partner.
Oh, okay.
Or divorce, or spouses are breaking up, but one spouse wants to stay, wants to keep the house. There's equity. That spouse doesn't want to give up that 2.5% first mortgage, so they'll take out a second on the home that they've agreed that spouse is going to keep, and then give the proceeds to the other spouse. A HELOAN, again, that's a fixed item, fixed amount. You know what it is. That makes it a good option. And then, of course, if you've got an ongoing project, it may still make sense to get a HELOAN with a lump sum, because what you're doing is you're going to be completing the project at a known cost. If you've got a project that could go 1 or 2 or 3 years, a HELOC could be a little risky, because what if rates start going up?
Good point.
So your interest cost that you may have budgeted for that longer term project may get blown up, because you're using a variable rate loan vehicle, not a fixed rate loan vehicle. So that's another way a HELOAN makes more sense.
Well, before we get into the advantages, I mean, I think you've explained the advantages very well, but I notice on the rate grid, and this has been true for a while, that HELOANs seem to have a better rate than HELOCs. And the cool thing about a HELOAN is you're locking in a good rate right now that's better than a HELOC, which could move around a little bit.
Well, correct, because everyone for years now been expecting rates are going to be falling. They're going to be falling. They're going to be falling. We're just waiting for the Fed to take action. Well, what's the latest narrative? The Fed may have to raise the Fed funds rate 1 or 2 times this year because inflation's creeping up. Well, guess what? If you were on a HELOC, you don't like to hear that, because that means your HELOC is going to go up at the exact same time. Because when you're on a HELOC tied to prime, that is directly associated with the Fed funds rate, not like a first mortgage. So understand that distinction. A HELOC, yes, when the Fed changes the Fed funds rate, your HELOC rate is changing immediately, because it's tied to prime, which is a short-term rate, not to the 30-year fixed mortgage. That's why a 30-year fixed mortgage doesn't move by the amount the Fed changes the Fed funds rate, because they're not directly correlated at all.
Seems like a strong advantage. Talk about some considerations.
Well, to finish the advantages, you got the fixed rate, you've got a predictable payment. You got a predictable payment. It's easier to budget because you know what your payment is. You know it's never going to change. And as you alluded to, you've got a cap on your worst case rate. It's the rate you closed at. That becomes your worst case. You're totally insulated from future rate increases that the variable rate HELOC leaves you, exposed to. So then in terms of considerations, understand, of course, that with a HELOAN, you're getting all your proceeds all at once. And so you're accruing interest on the entire amount of the loan immediately. With a HELOC, if you get one where you don't have to draw it all at once, you're not incurring all of the interest costs when it's fully used, because you haven't used it yet. So that's understand about a fixed rate loan. And then, of course, it's just a less flexible financing tool if your needs suddenly change. So, it's once you've committed and the loan's closed, it is what it is. If it turns out later, I wish I had access to more money over a longer future and don't need it all at once, well, it's too late. You'd have to go out and reapply for a HELOC. You can't go back and change it. So.
Interesting. Give us a simple example of where, I mean, you've shared several, but give us an example of how this would look.
Well, what comes to mind is I have somebody who or I had somebody who was looking for uh, funds, a specific amount of funds, to complete construction of a home, a second home that they were building in Washington.
Oh,
And they thought they had all the costs covered. Project was, underway. They were pretty far along, but they were coming up short, and quite a bit short. They needed a good chunk of cash. And we spent a lot of time talking about it. I wanted to know, do you have any other future needs for cash besides this, completing this one project? No, absolutely not. This is it. We know for certain we just need to get this done. And so we came up with the amount they needed, and we went the HELOAN route because based on the equity in their primary home that was being used to secure the loan, they had plenty of equity, a lot of equity. And, the basic principle, folks, in fact, always understand fixed rate loans generally are always going to have a better rate than variable rate loans for a very simple reason: less risk. A variable rate loan is more risk to the lender and to the borrower. More risk equals higher rate. So the HELOAN was a better deal just in terms of rate. And they also liked the idea of shortening the term because they didn't want to have this thing, secured by the home for that long. So they were going to take the shorter term, and then they were going to pay extra because they wanted to get rid of that loan pretty quickly. And so the fixed rate loan, the HELOAN, make total sense. So that's the way we went. They got a better rate. They had a fixed payment. Then they paid extra to accelerate the payoff, even though they took a shorter term to start with. So it kind of checked all their boxes, and they'll get this one project done. They've got their second home, and off they go. They were of retirement age, and so this would kind of complete the package and put them in a solid ground going forward. So
got it. Well, let's do a little quick comparison here. On the left side here, you'll see, here's the features that you've talked about: funds received, interest rates, payment, best for a reusable credit, and budget predictability. Walk us through this.
Yeah, again, HELOC, funds needed. In fact, let's go across each one. HELOC, funds needed. For funds received, HELOC only as you need to. Home equity, you get it all at once. There's no choice there. All at once or as needed. Now, again, one kind of disclaimer on the HELOC as needed. Most of the loans we offer, unfortunately, the lender does force you to draw a minimum amount from the HELOC at closing. They're no longer in the business of closing this HELOC with no draw at all, just to allow you to let it sit there unused, maybe for years. That's a loser for them. They're not earning a yield on you. They don't even recover the cost for their overhead to make the loan for you. So just keep that in mind. The as needed has that one disclaimer to it. You do have to draw a minimum amount, but then after that, as needed definitely applies. The second line, interest rate. Again, HELOCs are a variable rate loan. They're an ARM loan. Home equity loan, a HELOAN, is fixed. That's why oftentimes the HELOAN will offer you a better rate than the HELOC simply because of its fixed feature. Payment, again, HELOAN, HELOAN's people are comfortable with them because it's what they know, right? If you've ever owned a home, you know what a fixed rate loan is. It's pretty simple to understand. And so with the HELOAN, your payment's fixed. But again, with the HELOC, it could change. And that can get a little unnerving if we ever get back into a substantial rising interest rate environment. I don't see that coming, but you never know. HELOC is best for ongoing or uncertain needs. Absolutely. You need more flexibility. Your access to cash needs differ over time, more or less. So the HELOC can address all of that, different change in circumstances in most cases. So it can be a better option despite the other downsides and risks. Again, home equity loan, best for known one-time expenses, lump sum. You need the money, you want to get something done, and then you want to move on and not deal with it anymore. The HELOC, yes, reusable credit. Again, it's a credit card secured by your home. Home equity loan, nope. One time, lump sum, fixed rate, get the money, make your payments, and you're done. And then, of course, budget predictability, only moderate because HELOCs can change. Your interest costs can change. Your monthly payment can change. Very high, predictability with a fixed rate for obvious reasons. If you know everything, you know the rate, you know the payment, you know how much interest is going every month and so forth, boy, it's easy to understand, right? So, that is the quick comparison. Those are the differences you should think about when you're trying to choose one over the other.
And the last thing we want to talk about is which option fits your situation. And so we have choose a HELOC or choose a home equity loan. So as we go through this.
Yeah, again, take the HELOC if you need flexibility, and your costs are going to be incurred over time, not all at once. And you do want a financial safety net. Some people, even though they may have a modest need for funds, they will oftentimes take a larger HELOC because they want to get that more modest amount of funds obtained to do whatever they need. But their longer term goal is they want a lot of extra credit, more line of credit limit. They want access to that. That becomes sort of their rainy day fund, kind of a reverse savings account where if they need money in an emergency, they like the idea that with the HELOC, they have that ability. So that creates that safety net that's on that bullet point. And again, you only prefer, borrowing the money and incurring interest costs when you're actually using the money. Now with a home equity loan, a HELON, it's only because, you need to know exactly how much you want and then try to get the HELON for that amount. You want a fixed rate and payment. You want no uncertainty at all. And that, again, fixed rate, usually it's going to be a better rate than a HELOC, a little bit. You prefer certainty and structure. Some folks out there, absolutely, they cannot tolerate any uncertainty, any adjustments, the unknown of what the rate could go to. In a HELOC presentation, at some point I've got to mention to folks, the life cap on these is 18%. So, can a HELOC rate go to 18%? Well, yeah.
Wow.
It happened 40 years ago. I don't see any chance of that in our lifetimes, but could it happen? Well, you have to admit, yes. And so if that, even though the probabilities of that happening are crazy low, I mean, for some folks, even that sliver of risk is too much for them. Yeah, and that could be a reason that you would prefer the certainty and structure of a HELON. And of course, you're concerned about rising rates, despite, everyone expecting lower rates. Now the narrative gets to be more about rates possibly going up. That could be spooking some people. And that's why HELON can be a really good choice.
Well, I think this, first of all, Art, thanks so much for breaking this down the way you have. And really in these last two slides, it's real easy for people to look at it and say, which one fits my scenario better? Right. I always say is, hey, what's the next thing we should do? Is, what's the most important question people should ask is.
Well, yeah, exactly. As you're putting here, it requires a conversation. I'm pretty good at sort of interviewing people without making them feel like I'm, considering them for a job, but it's like, yeah, I want to find out things like how much equity do you have? I do want to find out, what kind of income do you have? Because part of my job, if you decide you want to seriously pursue this, is I've got to determine if you can qualify based on meeting a debt to income ratio requirement. And then it's also going to be helpful for me to understand what is the money going to be used for. We need to ask that question as part of processing one of these anyway. The lender wants to know. But, whether your need is ongoing or is a one-time expense, I want to know that because that's going to help me, make the proper recommendation to the homeowner as to which option is going to make more sense for them in the long run. Because I want to make sure that we match up the financing to their needs and make sure there's no disconnect there because that can be a problem later. So,
got it.
So again, bottom line, it's really, they're two very good choices. A HELOC is going to give you that flexibility. It can be a great, great tool for the right situation. Again, if you manage it properly, but yet at the same time, if you've got a significant, need for funds and you know what you need it for, and you don't anticipate you're going to need that kind of money again for anything else, of similar in nature, well then, the HELON becomes really the preferred option because of combining the fact it addresses the certainty of what you need it for, the certainty of your project, and then you have the certainty of payment, of rate, and chances are your rate's going to be better than the HELOC. So, but at the end of the day, right, when you read either one of these in terms of what the benefits are, everybody's different. And I've been in situations where I would have swore the borrower would say, well, I'm going to take a HELON based on what you're saying I should be thinking. And they don't do that. And they go, no, I'm going to do the HELOC. okay. I mean, all you can do, and there's no wrong answer. That's the point. Both of these can work very well, and they are, because this part of the mortgage market is really kind of a bright spot. There's a lot more of these kind of loans being made relative to first mortgages. So ultimately, then either choice is a good one. We can at least give you a little bit more informed, education about, what to consider. And then again, it's your choice, and then we'll be happy to take it from there and get it done for you.
Well, I just have to ask, because is there a special option for senior homeowners?
Yes, there is. And of course, as Jeff will tell you, I initially suggested for this show we would talk about that as well. But Jeff's the wiser of the two of us, and he counseled me that no, we're going to run out of time. So we're going to save that topic for everyone next week, because yes, when it comes to senior homeowners and when we're talking about lines of credit, there's some very, very good information that all senior homeowners should know about, particularly those of you who have tried to get a HELOC, a traditional HELOC, and maybe ran into some trouble. This topic we'll cover next week, and I would urge you to come back and listen and see what we have to say. I think it could be very helpful for you or someone who's a senior homeowner that may need some new ideas about how to access their equity.
I love that. We started 2 weeks ago, or last week, I guess typically just a week ago, talking about how to make a different option versus moving.
Right.
You made a decision at one point, you're thinking maybe this is a home I want to live in. And this is renewing that of saying, hey, I'm going to pull some equity out of my home. The biggest thing we talked about last week and reinforced a little bit this week with a lot of additional options is, hey, remodel your home and
Right.
freshen it up. And, I seem to hear more and more people doing this. As you said, this is a bright spot in the industry, is people are saying, hey, who do you know that does bathrooms, or who do you know
Right.
that's remodeling the kitchen? And
Yep.
it's fun to hear that, because it's almost like they're falling in love with their homes again, and they've used the equity, which they have personally grown. No one's given it to them. They've personally grown that to then rekindle that love for their home through the remodel. So it's kind of cool.
It really is, and it's good to see, and it's just it's fun to be part of that for those who are going to take that path. And I got to tell you, if it all goes well and they don't have contractor problems and all that, it's fun to see when they finally get to their destination and in this place that they thought just didn't work anymore and they had to get rid of, and suddenly it's like, oh, we love it. We're not going anywhere. We're sticking right here, because now it is what we always thought it could be.
So the next steps, give Art a call, 760-969-5023. He'll collect some information, like he said. And then, the one thing I love about Art is, as you're hearing from the show, if this is not your first time here, he's a counselor. I mean, it's not one of those situations where he's in it to just close a loan, because you've been doing this for so long. You have a lot of repeat and recurring customers in the mortgage industry, do you not?
Yes, no, that is true, and I will also make sure everyone knows my counseling rates are the same as Lucy's.
I love it.
If for those of you who are old enough to remember Peanuts,
Well, Art, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening to this week's Mortgage Minute. Appreciate your attention and interest in our program. Stay tuned for the next edition next week, where, as Jeff and I just mentioned, we'll talk about what senior homeowners need to know about tapping into their equity. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Hope weather remains good where you are. And again, enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you next week on the next edition of the Mortgage Minute. So long. Take care.